every Tuesday and Thursday evening, just as the dinner rush at Romano's Italian restaurant was winding down. Daniel Cooper would notice her, a young woman in a wheelchair, waiting patiently by the side entrance near the kitchen. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, though he wouldn't learn that until much later. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the curly brown hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes that seemed to carry both sadness and hope in equal measure. Daniel was 48 years old, a single father raising his 12-year-old daughter Emma alone since his wife passed 3 years ago. He worked as the evening manager at Romano's, a job that kept food on the table and gave him the flexibility to be there when Emma needed him. Life had taught him that kindness costs nothing, and lately, he'd been thinking a lot about what really matters. Sarah never came inside the restaurant. She would sit there in her wheelchair, wearing that red sweater she seemed to favor, rain or shine, waiting for the staff to bring out the leftover food at the end of the night. Some of the younger servers would hurry past her, uncomfortable or simply too busy to notice. But Daniel always noticed. He made sure she got the better leftovers, the meals that were still warm, the bread that was freshly baked that morning. "Thank you," she would say softly each time, her voice barely above a whisper. She never asked for money, never asked for anything beyond what was being thrown away anyway. There was a dignity about her that Daniel respected, a quiet strength that reminded him of his late wife during her final months. One rainy Thursday in late October, Daniel made a decision. Emma was spending the night at her grandmother's house, and he had nowhere to be. As Sarah wheeled herself away from the restaurant, struggling slightly on the wet pavement, he grabbed his jacket and followed at a distance, not to intrude or make her uncomfortable, but because something in his heart told him he needed to understand her story. She moved slowly through the darkening streets, the bag of leftovers balanced carefully on her lap. Daniel kept his distance, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice, but close enough to make sure she was safe. The neighborhood grew quieter as they moved away from the main street. Old houses with sagging porches lined the road. Streetlights flickered into growing darkness. After about 15 minutes, Sarah turned down a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings. Daniel hesitated, then continued following. What he saw when he reached the alley opening made his heart stop. There, in the dim light, was a makeshift shelter constructed from cardboard boxes and old tarps. But Sarah wasn't alone. Sitting on wooden crates and overturned buckets were 6 elderly people, their faces weathered by time and hardship. They looked up as Sarah approached, and their expressions transformed from worry to relief to joy. Sarah's back, an old man with white hair called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Daniel watched from the shadows as Sarah began unpacking the food. She divided everything carefully, precisely, making sure each person got an equal share. She gave away the warmest portions, keeping only the smallest piece for herself. "Mr. Peterson, I got you the minestrone soup you like," she said gently to the white-haired man. "And Mrs. Chen, there's fresh bread tonight. I made sure to ask for extra." An elderly woman with kind eyes and deep wrinkles reached out to touch Sarah's hand. "You're such a good girl, Sarah. Your mother would be so proud." Sarah's face clouded for a moment. "I just wish I could do more. I can't work anymore. Not since the accident. But I can still do this. I can still make sure you all eat." Daniel's throat tightened. Here was this young woman, paralyzed and struggling herself, and she was spending her days making sure others even worse off than she was didn't go hungry. While other people her age were building careers and living carefree lives, Sarah was a guardian angel to forgotten souls. He listened as they talked while eating. He learned that Sarah had been a nursing student before a car accident 2 years ago left her unable to walk. Her parents had died when she was young, and she'd been living with her grandmother until the elderly woman passed away 6 months ago. Without family, without disability checks that seemed perpetually delayed in bureaucratic red tape, Sarah had ended up on the streets. But instead of giving up, instead of thinking only of her own survival, she had found these 6 elderly people, each with their own tragic story of how they'd ended up homeless, and she made it her mission to take care of them. "My medication ran out last week," Sarah told them quietly. "The pain is getting worse, but the free clinic said it'll be another month before they can see me. It's okay though. I'm managing." She wasn't managing. Daniel could see it in the way she winced when she moved, in the dark circles under her eyes, in the way her hands trembled slightly as she handed out the food. That night, Daniel walked home with tears streaming down his face. He thought about his own complaints, his own frustrations about working long hours or dealing with difficult customers. Here was someone who had every reason to be bitter, to be angry at the world, and instead she was spending her energy caring for others. He thought about Emma and what he wanted to teach her about being human, about what really mattered in life, and he knew what he had to do. The next morning, Daniel called in a favor from an old friend who worked in real estate. He made phone calls, sent emails, talked to everyone he knew. By that evening, he had a plan. On Saturday, Daniel returned to the alley. Sarah was there, as always, organizing the small community. When she saw him, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't mean for anyone to follow me. We're not causing trouble." "We'll move if Sarah," Daniel interrupted gently. "I'm not here to make you leave. I'm here to help." Over the next hour, he explained his plan. He'd found a small building, an old boarding house that had been sitting empty for 2 years. The owner was willing to rent it cheap if someone would fix it up. Daniel had already called in volunteers from his church. They would have it livable in 2 weeks. "But I can't pay rent," Sarah said, her eyes filling with tears. "I can barely." "You'll help manage it," Daniel said. "It'll be a group home for you and your friends here. We'll get you connected with social services, get everyone the help they need. And Sarah, I've already made an appointment for you at their hospital. A friend of mine is a doctor there. He'll see you next week, get you the medication you need." Sarah stared at him, unable to speak. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why would you do this for us?" Daniel smiled, thinking of his own daughter, of the lessons he wanted her to learn about compassion and human dignity. "Because you showed me what real kindness looks like," he said. "Because watching you take care of others when you could barely take care of yourself reminded me of what my wife used to say. She'd tell me that we're not just here to get through our own lives. We're here to make sure others can get through theirs." 2 months later, Sarah and her 6 elderly friends were settled in the boarding house. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and dry and safe. Social services had finally processed everyone's paperwork. The elderly residents were getting their benefits. Sarah was back on her medication and had started taking online classes to finish her nursing degree. Daniel brought Emma to visit one Sunday afternoon. His daughter had helped organize a donation drive at her school, collecting clothes and household items for the new residents. "Dad," Emma said as they drove home, "why didn't those people have help before? Why did Sarah have to do it all alone?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people fall through the cracks. Sometimes the world moves so fast that we forget to look down and see who's struggling. That's why it's important to pay attention, to notice the people around us, to remember that everyone has a story." "Like you noticed Sarah," Emma said. "Like I noticed Sarah," Daniel agreed. "But really, she's the one who taught me something. She taught me that no matter how hard life gets, we always have a choice. We can focus on our own problems, or we can look around and see how we might help someone else. And somehow, when we choose to help others, our own problems don't seem quite so heavy." That became Daniel's favorite lesson to share, the one he'd learned from a young woman in a wheelchair who turned out to be braver and stronger than anyone he'd ever met. In helping Sarah, he'd found his own purpose renewed, and in watching her care for others, he'd been reminded of a simple truth: the measure of our lives isn't what we accumulate for ourselves, but what we give away to others. Years later, when Sarah graduated with her nursing degree and started working at a rehabilitation center helping other people with disabilities, she would tell her patients about the man who followed her home one rainy night. The man who saw not her limitations, but her limitless capacity for love. And she would remind them that kindness is never wasted, that sometimes one person's compassion can change not just one life, but many.